June 1791. The Tuileries Palace in Paris is not a home, it's a gilded cage. For 2 years, King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette have been prisoners of a revolution that is spiraling out of their control. The trust between the monarchy and the people has evaporated. In the quiet, tense corridors of the palace, a desperate plan is taking shape. It's known to history as the flight to Varennes, but it wasn't supposed to be a flight. It was a calculated political escape. The plan was to flee Paris and travel east to the fortress town of Montmédy near the border. There, they would rally loyalist troops, renegotiate the terms of the Constitution from a position of strength, and perhaps even save the monarchy itself. It was a final, desperate gamble. This is the story of that gamble, a 24-hour journey that, had it succeeded, might have changed the course of modern history. Instead, it became a cascade of small mistakes and fatal miscalculations that sealed the fate of a king and queen and pushed France down the bloody path toward the Reign of Terror. The architect of the escape was Count Axel von Fersen, a Swedish nobleman and a fiercely loyal friend, many believed, a lover of Marie Antoinette. Fersen was meticulous. He arranged for passports, loyal soldiers to escort them along the route, and fresh horses at relay stations. The destination was 200 miles away. With speed and secrecy, it was possible. But the first major error came before they even left. Marie Antoinette insisted that the entire royal family, the king, the queen, their 2 children, and the king's sister travel together. This required a large, custom-built carriage known as a berlin. It was heavy, slow, and painted a conspicuous dark green and yellow. It was a palace on wheels, a terrible choice for a secret escape. Their disguises were another point of contention. The king, a man whose face was on every coin in the kingdom, was to pose as a valet named Monsieur Durand. The queen would be Madame de Corf, a Russian baroness acting as a governess to her own children. It was a thin charade, one that relied on nobody looking too closely. On the night of June 20th, the plan was set in motion. One by one, under the cover of darkness, the royal family slipped out of the heavily guarded palace. Count Fersen himself drove them in a smaller carriage through the sleeping streets of Paris to a rendezvous point on the outskirts of the city where the Grand Berlin was waiting. But there was a problem. Marie Antoinette, the last to leave, got lost in the confusing labyrinth of the Louvre's courtyards. For nearly an hour, the escape was held up, the family waiting anxiously in the shadows. It was the first of many disastrous delays. By the time they finally departed Paris, they were already 2 hours behind schedule. As Fersen bid a final, emotional farewell and the Berlin rumbled east, a sense of relief washed over the family. They were free of Paris. The morning sun rose, and the French countryside stretched out before them. For a few hours, it must have felt like they had succeeded. But the slow pace of the Berlin was a constant worry. The carefully timed arrival of their military escorts at various towns along the route was thrown into disarray. At the first rendezvous point, the soldiers, having waited for hours and drawing unwanted attention, had already left. The king himself was surprisingly and fatally relaxed. Several times along the journey, he casually stepped out of the carriage to stretch his legs and speak to locals, believing his disguise as a lowly valet would protect him. He underestimated the growing political awareness of the French people. In the early evening, they rolled into the town of Sainte-Menehould. By now, they were desperately behind schedule. Fresh horses were waiting, but so was a man named Jean-Baptiste Drouet. Drouet was the local postmaster, a former soldier and a staunch revolutionary. As the carriage stopped, Drouet caught a glimpse of the woman he recognized as the queen. Then he looked at the valet, Monsieur Durand. There was something familiar about his face. The profile, the prominent nose. It seemed to match the portrait of the king on a new piece of paper money, and a signet that he had in his pocket. He wasn't completely sure, but his suspicion was enough. After the royal carriage departed, the commander of the dragoons stationed in the town rode up and asked Drouet if he had seen a carriage carrying the royal family. The question confirmed his fears. He knew he had to act. While the Berlin lumbered along the main road to the next town of Varennes, Drouet and a friend mounted their horses and took a shortcut, galloping across fields and through dark forests. It was a race against time. A race between a determined postmaster on horseback and a king in a gilded carriage. The royal family arrived at the outskirts of Varennes late at night, around 11 p.m., and here the plan completely unraveled. Their military escort, under the command of a young duke, was supposed to be waiting for them. But due to the long delay and fearing they had missed them, the duke had told his men to stand down just a half hour before. The streets were empty. The carriage stopped, lost, and confused. The queen herself got out and wandered through the dark streets, knocking on doors, trying to find their loyalist contact. But it was too late. Drew had arrived moments earlier. With the help of the local procureur, a man named Sauce, Drouet quickly assembled the National Guard. They overturned a cart on the bridge over the river Aire, blocking the only escape route out of Varennes. When the Royal Berlin finally tried to cross, it was surrounded. A local official, holding a lantern up to the face of the man in the valet's costume, demanded his papers. The king, flustered, handed them over. The official looked at the passport, then at the man's face, then back again. The charade was over. The family was escorted to the home of the grocer, Monsieur Sauce, just a few yards from the bridge. The town's alarm bell, the tocsin, began to ring, calling peasants from the surrounding fields. Soon, the small house was surrounded by a massive, anxious crowd. Inside, there was a moment of surreal domesticity. The exhausted royal children were put to bed. Monsieur Sauce's wife offered the queen a simple meal, but the tension was unbearable. For hours, Louis denied his identity, clinging to the lie. Finally, as more and more officials and armed guards packed into the small room, a local judge who had seen the king before at Versailles looked at him and spoke. "Yes, it is you, sire." Defeated, Louis XVI finally admitted the truth. "Yes, I am your king." He then made a plea, not as a king, but as a father. He begged them to let his family go, to allow them to continue to Montmedy, promising he meant them no harm. But the decision was no longer in his hands. The revolution had him in its grasp. The next morning, emissaries from the National Assembly in Paris arrived. The journey back began. The slow, humiliating return to the A capital was the complete opposite of their hopeful departure. This time, they were flanked by thousands of National Guardsmen. The roads were lined with enormous crowds, but unlike before, these crowds were silent, ominously silent. A notice had been posted across Paris. "Whoever applauds the king will be flogged. Whoever insults him will be hanged." When they finally re-entered Paris, Marie Antoinette was shocked to see that in just a few days, her hair had turned as white as that of a 70-year-old woman. The failed escape had broken something, not just in her, but in the monarchy itself. The fiction of a constitutional monarchy, of a king who supported the revolution, was shattered forever. The flight to Varennes was seen as an act of treason. Louis was no longer a king who could be trusted. He was a traitor who had tried to abandon his people. From that moment on, the most radical elements of the revolution gained the upper hand. The calls for abolishing the monarchy and establishing a republic grew louder and more insistent. The royal family was placed under even stricter guard. Their fate was all but sealed. Less than 2 years later, Louis XVI would be led to the guillotine. Marie Antoinette would follow him 9 months after that. Their doomed escape, a journey born of desperation and plagued by mistakes, had not saved them. It had only accelerated their tragic end. The story of the flight to Varennes is a powerful reminder of how history can turn on the smallest of details. A delayed departure, a conspicuous carriage, a chance recognition from a face on a coin. It was the final, failed gambit of a dying monarchy and a point of no return on the road to a new France.